looking forward to seeing Nathan's presentation here. I understand it involves a bit of AI and a very interesting topic, non-business related. So it's going to be a fun session, and Nathan's always some good ideas and things to share. So looking forward to it.
Well, thanks, Hamish. Kia ora, tēnā koutou. So it's Friday afternoon. The weather is beautiful, and we are all about to slip into pizza comas. We're about to go to the Women's Rugby World Cup, and I can't have any of you risking an injury. So I'll just stand up for a minute, and let's all just do a big stretch. All right, good job. You can sit down. Initially, I thought that we'd do something more rugby themed, like a crouch, bind, and engage, but the organizers were concerned with health and safety issues, so we got by with a stretch. Welcome to Play On, the Power Platform at the Women's Rugby World Cup. I'm Nathan Rose. I'm a senior consultant at Capgemini here in Auckland. I work with the Power Platform, Dynamics 365 CE, and Azure every day, and I absolutely love using the Power Platform to help customers solve business challenges. So before we get into the demo today, I'll just go through the big idea. I'll give you a second to read this quote by Tim Berners-Lee. He's the academic who's widely credited with the invention of the World Wide Web. And I love this quote because it really embodies what we're on our platform. So I'll just give you a minute to read through that. So if there's nothing else you take away from today's session, I hope you're inspired to think about your business in new ways, think about some of the challenges you face, ways you can use components in the Power Platform and Azure to solve them. So as Microsoft continues down this low-code, no-code path, we are increasingly only limited by our imagination. And to exciting because I'm not a traditional dev. Okay, so what are we here to do? A few weeks ago, I was having a one-to-one with my boss, and I had a thought bubble that, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if we could use Azure sentiment analysis in the Power Platform to predict match winners at the Rugby World Cup? My boss said that sounds like a cool skunkworks project, and here we all are. So let me cover off the solution elements that you're going to be seeing in just a couple of minutes. So the first thing so this whole thing started when I found a free Rugby API posted on Rapid API. It had data for the Women's Rugby World Cup. It had fixtures, it had match data, it had teams. And that really drove the data model that you're going to see in the model-driven app in a few minutes. However, it just would not play with Power Automate. Reasons I can't explain. So I created a custom connector successfully. In the custom connector canvas, it was showing data coming from Rapid API. When I used the custom connector in a Cloudflow, I got a 500 bad request data error. Same thing happened when I tried to bypass that and use the HTTP. For whatever reason, this API did not want to play. So what I ended up doing was using the test canvas in Rapid API, generate a JSON object, and then manually paste that into a. If I'd had a bit more time, I would have liked to have played around with desktop flows and trying to automate a bit more. That's the first thing. Moving into the Power Platform. So we've got our standard model-driven app. I am using some custom pages, one of which has a slightly controversial use. So I'm looking for thoughts either strongly for or against. Pretty sure Mr. Shield is going to have some thoughts on it, but yeah, we'll see what everybody thinks. Using a bit of Power Effects, I'm using a custom ribbon command and some calculated columns, which are my favorite things in the world. One of which I believe is an absolute perfect use case for Power Effects calculated columns. So I'm excited to show you that. And then Power Automate is doing the heavy lifting between Power Platform and Azure Cognitive Services and social media. So in terms of Azure Cognitive Services, we're hooked up to the Bing News API to pass rugby team names through Bing News Search and then run them through Azure Sentiment Analysis, which is also part of the Cognitive Services suite. And of course, we're hooked up to Twitter as well to bring in tweet data. So those are the solution elements. So with no further ado, let's get into the demo. And these are the things that I'm going to take you through. So the audio coming through okay online?
Yes.
Awesome. So we'll go through the model-driven app, my rather controversial use of custom pages, the data structure, Power Effects, Power Automate doing the heavy lifting between Azure and Power Platform and social media, get into a bit of Azure Cognitive Services, take you through my prediction methodology and assumptions, and those of you who specialize in data modeling, analytics, I really want to hear from you in the Q&A because this is not my area of expertise. All kinds of thoughts on what I did wrong. So, and of course, the business end of it, how accurate was it? How well did we do? So, let's get into the demo. And the first thing you're probably saying to yourself is, this doesn't look like a model-driven app I've seen before. Left-hand side, I see the sitemap. That looks normal. What's going on here? And one of the things that I've really challenged myself on over the past year or so is put myself in the shoes of a user. Imagine you have never seen a model-driven app. First time you log in, it is incredibly overwhelming. No matter how well you've designed the sitemap, the user often sits there and says, what am I meant to do? So this custom page is my first, possibly ham-handed attempt at directing the user to what are you meant to do when you log in. And so I'm just using some Power Effects commands in these buttons to say I want to go to these record types in the app, and I click it, it takes me there. Now, as I mentioned, this was a rather controversial choice because when I showed this off internally, a number of my teammates said, why would you do that? Who wants to support this? You should just customize the sitemap and invest in user training. But again, imagine they've never seen the app. Think about the first time you ever used Facebook or LinkedIn. Who taught you how to do that? The app was self-explanatory from the moment you logged in through to making your first post to adding your first friend or connection. And so my challenge to myself and to those of us in the community is, how do we make Power Apps self-explanatory user? If we step outside the context of this demo for a second, imagine you're deploying a model-driven app into a large call center. It has high employee turnover. A user may use this app for a single shift. 50% of them won't be there in 12 months. You don't have the luxury of investing time in user training. They need to be productive from the minute they log in. So that's my challenge. Albeit a controversial choice, maybe a little ham-handed, but when we get to the Q&A, I'd love to hear your feedback in terms of my use of the custom page and how we can make it more self-explanatory, better for the first-time user. So, moving on to the data model. So the data model in the app was really driven by the data that came from Rapid API. And I've set this up as a series of one-to-many relationships. So at the top level, I've got a tournament. The idea being that this app could be running for multiple tournaments simultaneously. Women's World Cup, men's, 6 nations, 4 nations, you get the idea. The tournament is made up, so I click on it, right? The tournament is made up of pools. So in the case of this tournament, there's 3 pools. And the pools are made up of teams. Oops. So, and then the teams have fixtures. So there are matches, and I've grouped those as home and away. And then within the fixture, you've got match data, which is where I'm doing the predictions. When I designed this, the idea would be that this would all be updated from Rapid API, but it's been kind of a labor of love on my part throughout the tournament. And I'm sorry? Well, a lot of the reference data, the teams and stuff was done by Power Automate, but I've been manually updating scores and results. And so then we get our predictions. And so you can see these are the scores that are generated from Azure Cognitive Services. And we get a predicted winner based on the score. And then lastly, I'm just adding a match prediction history so that we can see how that prediction changes over time. So that's the app, that's the data structure. Let's move into the use of Power Effects, which is one of my favorite things in the whole wide world at the moment. So when I first created this app on my test fixture, my thinking was that a user would come in, they'd find a match they were interested in, and they would manually run a prediction. And so that's how I built it. And so that's why I've got this button in the ribbon to run a prediction. Now, when I showed this off to some colleagues, the first question I got was, so who does the app think is going to win the overall tournament? And that necessitated a slight change in design, and I'll get into that momentarily. But to give you kind of an idea of kind of how the guts of this, for lack of a better term, runs, we'll go through this manual process, and then I'll show you how I scaled it to the entire tournament to predict, to make some predictive winners. So this is a Power Effects command. This is a new feature from Microsoft. It just went GA a few months ago. And one of the things that I love about custom commands is that I can put logic on them to say when they show and when they don't. So if I go into a match that's already been played, I can't run a prediction on it. So it's looking at the match date to say hide that button. So because it really wouldn't make sense to predict a match that's already been played, unless you're writing the plot to Back to the Future. So when I click this button, it's going to go away and it's going to trigger Power Automate to run the team names, both the home and the away, through Azure Cognitive Services and Twitter, return news articles, tweets, and then pass them through Azure Sentiment Analysis. And let's go ahead and do that now, and let's see who the predicted winner is. So when we click this button, so it's going to let me know that this flow is running. And one of the things that I discovered about these banner notifications when I was creating this app is you can set timeout values on them. And so you don't have to manually dismiss them. So this will just automatically disappear within 30 seconds. So to let the user know I'm doing something, but the user doesn't have to manually dismiss it. So it's going to go and it's going to create this match data row. And once the flow is finished, it's going to give me an in-app notification with a link to the record that's been created so that the user can go see the prediction result. One thing I noticed when I was working with this, the in-app notifications, there can be a bit of a lag between when it gets created and when it actually pops up in the app. So we may see it pop up sometime in the next few minutes. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and look into this prediction record. So the sentiment analysis is run. We have a predicted winner. Now, something that fortunately I didn't know, and there's our in-app notification. Something really cool about these is you can set timeouts on them as well. So these are set to basically disappear after 2 minutes, so you're not cluttering up your storage, and the user doesn't have a whole applications that they have to look at. So flow is gone. It's returned these scores that have generated these total sentiment scores, and then this calculated field is comparing those to say who do we think the winner is going to be. Now this is the perfect use for a calculated column. Unfortunately, I didn't open the record in time to show you. So what it's doing is it is looking at these two scores and saying, what's the bigger one? So it's just a logical comparison, and it's putting the team name for the home, either the home or the away side, depending on which one is bigger. But the other thing it's doing, and I'll just quickly dive in to the solution, is it has another if condition on it. So if the sentiment score is 0, it gives me a holding status of predicting the winner. So if I went to it before I've had the notification, it says, hey, I'm still predicting the winner. Some other stuff that I had hoped to have prepared for this, but had to sacrifice to the demo gods is, what if you get a tie, and those types of scenarios. But unfortunately, the formulas weren't cooperating with me, so sacrifice to the demo gods. So that's the use of the Power Effects calculated fields. I've also got one running here on the front of this. So once the match is played, it can say, did we get it right? Did the actual winner match the predicted winner? So a couple of things to note about these Power Effects calculated fields. First thing is, if you need to use them to filter by fetch XML, so you're filtering a view, you're running an advanced find, stuff together, dashboard, values aren't available. So they're just, at the moment, they're just not. However, if you use Power Automate, can filter based on the values of these fields. Really, really cool. So as to whether or not to use them, I'd say if you need to filter views and advanced finds, kind of traditional fetch XML, go with a traditional calculated field. Otherwise, go with Power Effects. It's amazing. So, okay, so that's the use of Power Effects in the app. Let's go on to see Power Automate and how it's doing the heavy lifting. Yeah, okay, so this is the first flow that I built to work with that Power Effects custom command. And we'll go in and we'll see how it's working. So in order to trigger it, just between us, I had to do a bit of a hack. So Power Effects at the moment does not support Power Automate using ribbon commands, but you can get around it by using a flag field. So when you select that command, it's going to use a patch statement to toggle a Boolean field from no to yes to trigger the flow. Now, like you, I'm not a big fan of flag fields because 3 years from now, whoever takes over this will have no idea what that flag field was created. So, yeah, Power Automate's taking its time. Try this again. Yeah. 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 Okay. Well, that's good to know. So, yeah, I'm in good hands. So, all right. This is taking its sweet time. Tell you what. Let's just go to a previous run. Maybe that'll be faster. Yeah. Times like these, I wish I'd learned to sing and dance. So, we'll get into that. We will get into that. Yeah. So there's my prediction, and then there's what the AI thought. So, yeah, one of the things that you will be seeing momentarily is that Azure sentiment is kind of like your children, like they embarrass you when it's inconvenient. Hey, I'm going to demo this amazing thing. Why are you predicting eliminated teams are going to win? So, all right. Yeah. it was going so well, and then let's try again. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, we will get into that. So far out. There we go. So, okay, we're back. Yeah. All right. So when I trigger this flow to run, so the patch statement is just toggling that Boolean field from no to yes to trigger this flow to run in Dataverse. The next thing I'm doing is I am setting a ton of variables because we've got a lot of variables floating around. Now, something that I've shown previously at user group is that when you need to set a lot of variables, you can use a single variable of type object and then parse the JSON to make your flow run a bit more efficient. In this case, I needed to append to a bunch of array variables, and my JSON skills aren't that crash hot. So it's probably possible, but this was a skunkworks project, and so this is how I did it. So once I've initialized all these variables, I need to go and find the match data row that's associated to this match that we've toggled this process on. And if it doesn't find one, create one, otherwise just move on to the next step. So once I've done that, we need to go away. We need to start talking to Azure Cognitive Services and Twitter and all that fun stuff. And so this flow branches out into two identical branches for the home and the away sides. And so what I do is I get the name of either the home or the away team. The next thing I need to do is search Bing News and Twitter. And so I'm simply concatenating the team name with squad and Rugby World Cup 2022. The idea being that I want to try and get articles specific to this team at this tournament. So that was how I did it. So, and with Twitter, I'm concatenating the team name with the tournament hashtag to try and get tweets, again, that are more specific. Now, I'm limiting my search results to 5, and I'll talk you through that process. So, out of the box, Bing News defaults to 20 articles. However, when I was first testing this, there wasn't a lot of news articles about the World Cup. And so I was seeing some really weird predictions, like Fiji's going to defeat England, even heavy favorites to win. When I limited this to 5 articles, predictions got slightly more accurate. So I did the same with the tweet data, just to keep things simple. Sorry? What is? Accuracy. We're going to get into that. Yeah. I feel like a politician, but I promise you, we're going to get into that. So, yeah. Stay with me on the journey. It's going to be great. So, all right. So once I get these tweets and news articles, I need to run them through sentiment analysis. And the way sentiment analysis works is it takes a blob of text, analyzes it on a sentence by sentence basis, and it gives out a positive, neutral, and negative score, and rolls all those up to give an overall positive, neutral, and negative score for that entire blob of text. And it gives you a string. It was overall positive, neutral. I'm interested in the numerical scores because that's how we're going to try and predict winners. So I'm going to append those to my array variables. And then once I've done that, I need to go and create some total sentiment scores, positive, neutral, and negative, both the home and the away sides. Now, this is my favorite party trick in Power Automate at the moment. This came from a blog from Paul Morana, who's an MVP based in the UK, and he has a great blog on how you can instantly sum up arrays. It's lightning fast, really cool. I like it. So what you do is you get your array into a JSON format. And then there is a function in Power Automate called XPath. So all you do is you convert your JSON to XML, use XPath to sum it really fast. So I've got to do that 6 times across my home and away teams for the positive, neutral, and negative variables. Once I've done that, I need to update these on the match data row. Now, something to be aware of when you use XPath, that sum's going to come back in a string format. So depending on the type of field you're using in Dataverse, you need to convert decimal or an integer, or whatever you're using. So I set the match data. I add the in-app notification, which lets the user know that this prediction is done running. I add the history row, and then I toggle my Boolean field from yes. So that's basically how it works. Back in the app, in terms of the prediction methodology, what I'm doing is I'm using the neutral sentiment as a baseline. I'm adding the positive score and subtracting the negative. And that gives me that overall sentiment. And again, I'm using PowerFX calculated columns for that. So that's how we get an individual match prediction. But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the first question I got was, who's going to win the overall tournament? So this necessitated a slight change in design. So the next flow I created runs on a schedule. So this runs at midnight every day. And it basically does the same exact thing as the other one. Only differences are it lists all the matches that have not yet been played, runs through the same process except we're looping through social media, news articles, Twitter, for home and away sides for all unplayed matches. And then we're just updating the match data and the history, but there's no need to add a user notification because this is just an process that's running. Right. However, there's one more component to this. The way the tournament is structured is there's 3 pools with 4 teams in it. So to get 8 teams in the quarterfinals, the top 8 teams knockout rounds. The way the Women's World Cup works is the top 2 teams in each pool goes to the quarterfinals, followed by the next 2 highest ranking teams. So the way I did this was I said, let's create a total sentiment score for the team, rank them in their pools, and the overall. And so basically the top 8 teams in terms of sentiment score will be the predicted knockout round players. So the way I'm doing that is got another flow that runs half an hour later, 1 a.m. And what this is doing is generating this total sentiment score. So again, running on a schedule, it's going to list all of the teams in the tournament. It's then going to list all of their match data rows for their home and away matches. It's going to sum up all those sentiment scores, positive and negative. And then what I wanted to do to try and account for any weirdness in sentiment data, you're going to see it didn't work out too well, is I wanted to try and tip this towards teams that you would expect to win. So I'm adding each team's IRB ranking points, tournament points, and their points for versus points against calculation to their sentiment score to try and handicap this a bit. So, and of course, we're using our favorite Power Automate party trick to sum all this up. So once that runs, that's going to update this field here, this total sentiment analysis. And so you can see, as I mentioned, like your children, this decided to embarrass me overnight and make the top ranked team someone who went home last week. So, but I'm using these to then populate a dynamic tournament bracket with the predictions. So click over here. And so this is my second custom page. This is slightly less controversial, though looks like it came out of a 1980s video game, but I'm trying. So I leave the pretty stuff to Hamish, and I just try to do the data. So this is basically looking at the total, at the teams, ranking them by their sentiment score, and then putting brackets in. So this would be number 1 versus number 8. This would be number 2 versus number 7, and so on and so forth. Predicted winner is the team with the higher sentiment score. So at the end of the process, your predicted winner is the team with the highest sentiment score. Your runner-up is the team with the second highest, and so on and so forth. So it's a little weird. The predicted champion today is someone who went home last week. But yesterday's run was so much more accurate. But yeah. So some stuff that I wish, if I'd had some time, that I would have built would be, firstly, I wish I'd built a history of this, so I'd have a snapshot over time of who the predicted winners were. And secondly, an actual tournament bracket to compare this to. So that maybe I'll do that next year. So that's the app. Those are the predictions. That's who AI thinks is going to win the tournament overall. And exactly. So this is you're a few slides ahead of me, but we'll deal with this now. So one of the limitations of sentiment analysis is that it doesn't quite get nuanced language. So if you use sarcasm, like that was positively bad, it's going to go neutral. Or if you have, in the case of sports journalism, if they say the black ferns destroyed whales, you go, well, that's a negative. So for black ferns, that's very positive, and for whales, it isn't. So when you're dealing with nuanced language, sentiment analysis, definitely use caution. So yeah. If we could get the data and I could figure out how to do it, yeah, totally. So so that's the demo. So let's get to the business end of this. How did we do? So, whoops, here we go. Okay, so overall, it's at 45% accuracy at the moment. This is up to the quarterfinals, which were played last week. We'll see how we go this weekend. But something really interesting happened. It was like 50%, 33, 33, then shot to 75% last weekend in the quarterfinals. Now, unfortunately, I haven't done any investigation into this. So my uninformed opinion is there was probably better quality news and Twitter data as you get into the knockout rounds, but I'd need to get into the details to make a more opinion. Okay, so why are we all here? What did we learn from this? First and foremost, again, if you take nothing else away from this, I hope that you're inspired to look at your business in new ways, to say there's things that we could do, pulling disparate data sets together, using some of the functions in Azure AI. Again, you're really only limited by your imagination. And that is what I love about the Power Platform. Secondly, as we mentioned, sentiment analysis, use it with caution around nuanced language, but some things that you could be doing in your business. In Microsoft, you're using it now. It's like Sales Viva. We saw it in Jonathan and Diego's presentation earlier. Some stuff you could do is, let's say you have an account that's coming to renewal. You could loop activities on that account through sentiment analysis to say, positive or negative, do we think this account's going to renew? So in terms of Power Effects, you're only just scratching the surface of possibility. This PowerFX hasn't gotten quite the fanfare that Sales Viva and some of the other elements of the Power Platform have received recently. This is a huge, huge deal. PowerFX is going to allow us to customize the Power Platform in ways we've never imagined without code. So if you're whether you're a pro dev, consultant, business analyst, citizen dev, I'd encourage you to start getting your head around it, getting hands-on with it, because this will transform business. And then lastly, I need to improve the data modeling in the app. Not doing too crash hot at the moment. And there's a reason gamblers lose their shirts. I wouldn't take this down to the TAB. So that's the Power Platform at the Women's Rugby World Cup. Thank you so much for your time and your attention, and happy to take some questions.